Welcome to Identiverse 2024. This is the Deployments and Leading Practices track. Together with Lorraine Auld, I'm Greg Smith. We're the topic leads, and we also have Christine Owen, who will be joining us later today. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul for the first session, and I'll let him take it from here.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Good sound, yeah, it sounds good. What I wanted to do is just talk about a practical implementation of decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, and we a lot of us know the kind of the story around that. But what I want to do is take through a real project from the why did the project start, through how did you get to decentralized identity, and then what the decisions were made all the way along. And and those are decisions up to now. The project's say 18 months old, and the decisions may change as we go forward as well. But this is sort of a story of the last 18 months. So this is the agenda. I first want to talk about that. What is the requirements that drove this technology for this sort of farming community? What was the discussion about centralised versus decentralised? So it's one thing that's really interesting when people say decentralised, this is a decentralised solution, they can mean all sorts of different things. So I'll talk about what it meant in the context of this solution. Then I'll give a bit of an introduction to decentralised identity and verifiable credentials. It's been around for a while now. I think I've probably been involved with it for 4 or 5 years, but there's probably still people where it's newish. Then I'm going to talk about some of the decisions. What does it mean, verifiable data registry, credential format, exchange protocols, what we learn about wallets. We learned a lot about wallets, and then talked a bit about governance and where we're up to and some conclusions. So let's talk about these new requirements. So the requirements came from a few different angles, and the first one is from consumers. So there's pressure from consumers for producers to be able to say what I'm buying is sort of healthy for me, and it was done without wrecking the environment. So that's kind of the first input. The second is all the talk about climate change and all those things. There's a lot of new regulation being put on the farming communities. Things like what's your greenhouse gas emissions, how much nitrates are you using in your fertiliser, and all those sort of things. And then there's also other compliance type challenges of you want to get your product from one part of the world to another part of the world. How do you do that, and what sort of technology you need to enable that to happen? So really what this project was about, I've called it here a trusted digital framework, but it was about how do we get trusted data in this environment. So when we talk about credentials here, it's about getting trusted data or verifiable data around a big network. And it says here, an approach allows farmers and growers to capture, manage and share their data. It's interesting when you're involved in kind of farming communities, just how much it's become an IT job, not just to drive the tractor job. And it's about collecting data and being able to present that data. The important thing is also the farmers have the decision about who has access to their data and for what purpose. And also to increase their competitiveness for the farmers as well. This makes them more efficient. As I said, they don't want to be spending 90% of their time in the home office doing all this paperwork. They want something that's very efficient and easy to use. So what are the participants? In this project, there's more than 40,000 farms across beef, sheep, all sorts of different crops and things. And there's lots of organisations involved. So there's a farming federation, you've got banks obviously loan money to the farms, you've got federal government for regulation, local government for regulation, you have fertiliser companies have to do reporting, wholesalers want information, organic certifiers, environmental monitoring specialists, geospatial specialists. There's all sorts of people involved in this industry that all need data, and they need kind of verifiable data, not just data that's come from a PDF over email. So, but before I get into that, I wanted to talk about what they meant about they've taken a decentralised approach on this project. And what did that mean? So there was actually 2 proposals made for this project. One was a centralised approach, which just says we need to share information among all these bodies. What we'll do is we'll create a great big farm database. We'll get the government to run it or a big enterprise to run it, and we'll put all the data in there. So as the farmer's doing stuff, they report it. The fertiliser companies report it. The wholesalers can come in and get data, and the governments can come in and get data. Right? So that's That's pretty typical of the internet, isn't it, and how we all live. Right, what would you do there? Well, you'd have an IAM strategy, you'd have people log in, you'd have a policy about what data you can get access to, and if you set that all up, hopefully you don't have any problems. But there are problems with this approach, and the problem is that the data is considered very sensitive. All of the data that the farmers are producing and others are producing is actually very sensitive data. And it's not from a privacy point of view. You know, we all hear about our data going to a company, getting hacked, ending up on the dark web and being sold. That's the privacy problem. This is not so much a privacy problem as a business problem. Is farmers consider all the information about how they operate to be their personal identifiable information or their IP. They don't just want it up there. And they're very concerned about having it all in one place, open to abuse, leaking information, unauthorised access. That solution was considered pretty untenable from the farming community, which is interesting because that's pretty much how most of the world works. So then you've got this new approach, this decentralised approach, and this approach says we're going to have to share information among all these entities. Why don't we make the farmer the integration point? Why don't we say the data is coming through the farmer? So what's the advantage of doing that? And it's under the stewardship of the organisation, right? If all the data is being produced by the farmer and produced and sent out, and stuff is coming back through the farmer, really the farmer's at the middle of all of that, and they can have stewardship of that data. This stops direct integration between third parties, so we don't want the council to go to the fertiliser company and get information. No, you come through the farmer and get that information. So they're in control, which is a lot about when people talk about decentralised identity, it's about giving users control over their data. This is no different. It just happens to be these are farms, these are enterprises. And the farmer, again, is the integration point. They can share, they choose what they share, with whom and where they share it, and how much they want to share. And this is why standards are so important. And one thing that's beautiful about the decentralised identity ecosystem community is it's all based on standards. So there's standards about the protocols and the credential formats and all those things. And so on a project as large as this one, where there's going to be multiple vendors involved, standards make it workable. So let's just talk quickly about what's decentralised identity. So I always like looking at the trust over IP technology stack. To me, whenever I think about technology and decentralized identity, I always think about that stack. And I think about the bottom layer as sort of the ledger, the blockchain, or it could be a file system. But that's sort of the trust layer that makes the whole thing work. And then you have sort of secure communication on top of that. Then you have verifiable credentials being issued and verified above that. And then you're up the application ecosystem. So if you think about what the application ecosystem is, it's the farming community. And then you've got choices to make at all those different levels. And it says here, it's decentralized identity's approach to allow individuals and enterprise to manage their own data instead of using a central authority, right? This is what we want to do here. Important goal is to create standards, and standards allow, and in fact when this project started they said we cannot do it with just one vendor, it has to be multiple vendors because we've got to show that it's not a proprietary solution. And we're seeing DI, this whole DI space, we're seeing it across transportation, supply chain, banking, finance, healthcare, travel, farming and mining. Lots of projects around the world. So that's kind of a little bit of introduction to decentralized identity. But let's talk about verifiable credentials. I always say verifiable credentials are the killer app of decentralized identity. And what is a verifiable credential? Well, really it's anything that you can put in your wallet as like a driver's license or your gym membership card or anything like that. It can also be documents. But what it is, it's about making a digital representation of that, right? And it has a lot of advantages being in a digital form. So advantages are because it's cryptographically protected, so you can be sure who the issuer is. You can ensure that it hasn't been modified. You can do things like selective disclosure. You can do things like zero-knowledge proofs. And you can do revocation. None of those last three you can really do with a plastic driver's license, for example. Plastic driver's license, I might have had my license revoked and I can still present it. If it's in a digital form, when you go to present it, the verifier says, hold on, that's been revoked, that credential. So it has a lot of advantages of a digital representation versus kind of the plastic representation. And it doesn't just have to be things like driver's license. It can be PDF documents, it can be maps, it can be grids, it can be whatever it needs to be, as long as it can be set up as a set of claims that you can then put within a credential and have an issuer sign that. And I just want to go through this one. This one was what they call the triangle of trust. And when they mean a triangle, they mean issuer to holder to verifier. And in verifiable credentials, it's all about the issuer issuing a credential to a holder, which is a user or an enterprise, and then they do presentation proofs to a verifier. And then below that is a verifiable data registry. So I'll just talk through it for people who are new to this topic. The way you bootstrap it is the issuer has to write information to a verifiable data registry, and I'll talk about what the choices are there. And they put different information there. They put often their public key there, but depending on the credential type, they may even put schemas, credential definitions, revocation information there as well. So that's how you bootstrap it, is to say the issuer writes some stuff to this verifiable data registry. Once they've done that, they're in a position to issue credentials to users or enterprises. And so they create the credential, they'll send a message to the holder, they'll set up usually a secure connection, and then the issuer will say to the holder, I want to present a credential to you. The holder sees that in their wallet and goes, I accept that, and then the issuer issues the credential into the holder's wallet. And that's an important part. Everything in decentralized identity and wallets is it takes the user's permission before anything's done. So before you accept a credential, before you do a presentation proof, the wallet will come up and say, this issuer wants to issue this credential, or this verifier has asked you to present this information. Are you okay to do that? And so, okay, you've got in the holder's wallet, you've got one or more of these credentials, and then you want to present it somewhere to a verifier, and they term that a presentation proof. So it's not that you're sending your credential over to the verifier, but you're sending some part or some presentation of it. And if I take an example of selective disclosure, rather than me presenting my 20 items on my driver's license, why can't I just present 3 items? So you do a presentation proof, we just say 3 items on there. And then the verifier can verify the information. They can look up on the verifiable data registry information they need for that verification. So they can look up things like public keys and say, okay, I can see that the issuer did sign this. I can see that it hasn't been modified, so I'm okay to accept this. And they can also check things like revocation information. Now, I did talk about standards, and I said the good thing about decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, it's all standards-based. The bad thing is that there's quite a few different standards that are sort of competing, and we all know this story. So when we started, this is sort of 4 or 5 years ago, we started getting involved with Hyperledger. So you had things like Hyperledger Aries, Hyperledger Indy. That's part of Linux Foundation. Then we joined DIF, Decentralized Identity Foundation, and we're part of the DIDCOM working group. And then we're also part of Trust Over IP. So Trust Over IP is another group within the Linux Foundation. They were sort of the early ones. And then there's obviously W3C, had the DID standard, and W3C credential standard. So we joined that as well. So we're like, join. And then these are the new ones, IETF and OpenID. Probably over the last year or two, they've started to get involved. And some of the standards, for example, DIF are going to be moving to IETF. And there's credential exchange protocols in OpenID. So there's a lot there, actually, and you'll see it as I go further in terms of the different choices you make. But I think that's a pretty accurate sense of the main standards bodies, or the standards groups involved in this. So we're going to start at the bottom layer first, at the verifiable data registry. So in this project, we said, what are we going to use for a verifiable data registry? And we use that term. We don't say, what sort of ledger we're going to use, what sort of blockchain we're going to use, because there's other alternatives, like there's actually file system-based verifiable data registries. So you say verifiable data registries. So here's just a small set. There's more than 100 different DID methods out there for different verifiable data registries. The bottom ones down here, these ones here, up to about here, are your ledger blockchain-based verifiable data registries. You've got some web-based ones as well, so this is from file systems. And then you've got what they call self-resolving ones, where the DID itself might give you information, say, about the public key. And so there's many, many choices. There's something like 100 different DID methods. So we're talking about the bottom layer here. So for this project, we picked the Indy ledger, Hyperledger Indy, which I saw the stats, and I think it's still the most used ledger on DI projects, right, in terms of how much activity there is against Hyperledger Indy networks, and there's quite a few of them. I think there's about 10 of them out there. In Anonymly, we help run 2 of them. So we run validator nodes on the Sovereign network and on the Indicio network, and we also run a validator node on what's called a check network as well. But it's called the did-indy method. If you have a look at what it is, think of this as like a URL. This is the address. So this says it's a did-indy method. It's on the Sovereign network, and it's a staging network, and that's the address. And if you were to go and resolve that, you get what's called a did doc, or you get the information that was being stored on there. So I won't talk too much about the network. You can go and have a look at it yourself. But it's what they call a public permissioned network. It's usually limited to about 25 validator nodes. And it has centralized governance, which means if you want to start writing information on there, you actually have to sign documentation. As I said, if you resolve the did, you get the did doc information, which is things like public keys and endpoints and other information. And for the project we're using, right, there's a bunch of information that gets written there. Schemas, credential definition, issuer dids, and this is the revocation information I talked about. So that was the first choice. What is the verifiable data registry? In this case, we used Hyperledger Indy. Now let's talk about verifiable credential formats and exchange protocols. So when I talked about the triangle of trust, the decisions you've got to make is what sort of credential are you going to be sending to the holder and the holder used to present, and what sort of credential exchange protocols are you going to use. So there's sort of the format and the protocols. If we start at the credential format, I've sort of put the main ones that are available to choose from. So you've got the W3C ones here. And you say, oh, I want to use W3C credentials. And you say, oh, that's good. Well, you've got 4 different choices. And this is based on the version 2.0 data model. Then you've got a non-creds. And then you've got, this is the ISO standard, the mobile driver's license. And you're starting to see that. I think about half the states in the US are currently building driver's license following this standard. So the question is, which standard do you use? And there's new ones. So for example, if you go to the ITF, there's the SDJWT, which shouldn't be confused with this one. And so that list gets longer. And so what did we do? This is a pretty simple one where we wanted good compatibility with other vendors. So we just picked a non-creds here as the credential type. And it tells you, for example, that's the standard. You look at a Hyperledger and non-creds, and then it tells you it does selective disclosure, zero knowledge proofs, etc. Then you said, well, okay, that's the credential type. What about the exchange protocols? And there's many choices again. So you've got OpenID for VC. This is sort of the latest one. It comes out of OpenID Foundation. And that one, I don't think it's quite yet reached standards, but it's pretty close. But that's very popular, for example, in Europe. You've got the DIDCOM ARIES grouping. Then you've got the ISO MDL, this is mobile driver's license and their protocols, and then you've got some W3C. Here we implement ARIES and DIDCOM. So what that means is before an issuer talks to a holder, they first set up a DIDCOM connection, and then they use the ARIES protocols for the issuing, and the same between the holder and the verifier. They use a DIDCOM connection, and then they use ARIES protocols. And so if you go and have a look at ARIES, you'll see there's issuer protocols and presentation protocols, and there's state machines. So that's what we used in this project. If you keep going. So if you have a look at a summary of what we used across those 3 layers, we used at this layer Hyperledger ARIES, and it's AIP 1.0. That's ARIES Interop Protocol 1.0. There's 2.0 out now already, and I think they're working on 3.0. A non-creds 1.0, and there's a 2.0 being defined. DIDCOM 1.0, and there's already a 2.0 spec out there. And we're using did-indy at this level. So that gives you an idea of what was used for the project. And I would say that's a point-in-time decision when that was made. All of this stuff, you can see, will get updated over time. So, for example, because there's government involved in this, they're saying, well, actually, we think we prefer a W3C credential. So we'll probably change over to W3C credentials. Whether we'll continue to use did-indy method, we'll see. But over time, those can change, and sometimes independently. Now let's talk about wallets. We learn a lot about wallets in this project, and you say, well, you just need one wallet. Well, we've actually got we've needed 3 wallets for this project. And you think, why do you need 3 wallets? I'll talk about that. So let's talk about what a personal wallet is. Most wallets out there, and you see there's probably a dozen different ones you can just download and get wallets. Most of them what I would call personal wallets. What that means is it's a wallet to hold verifiable credentials for an individual. So it's to hold, verifiable credentials about myself or yourself. That's what it's all about. And they're usually mobile applications, right? They're usually a mobile application. Although even in that case, I would say it's not totally true, because what we've found is, sure, you might need to provide a wallet app, a full individual wallet app, but you may also need to provide like a native mobile SDK. So if the people that you want to give a wallet to have already got an application in the network, and the application provider prefers to add the wallet to their application, then you need a wallet SDK. So even within personal wallets, you need an SDK or a wallet app. They're two different choices that you'd need. But again, we're talking about a personal wallet here, which is about an individual. And the other thing about we learned is the personal wallet is accessed by one person. The reason it's on your mobile device is you're the only person that's accessing that credential. It makes sense because it's your driver's license or your gym membership or whatever it is. And this is just an example. This is how we started with personal wallets on the project. This is just an example here. You can see 5 different credentials on there. And then if you click on the credentials, like we allow them to be blown up so you can see some of the data. So this one here is like greenhouse gas emission. That one there is like spatial coordinates. So that there is actually a farm. And so farms have to be able to provide that information to the government about what their farm is. And they even have to break it down to say, in this farm I'm growing these crops here, this one's resting, this one's doing this, and I'm using these fertilisers and all that. So it's pretty sophisticated what you have to do, but that gives you an idea of some of the credentials and what it looks like in our mobile wallet. So that's in our mobile wallet. But now let's start to talk about what an enterprise wallet means. So we kind of learned this over the last 18 months, is that personal wallets don't provide the right capabilities for business and government, right? So we've built an enterprise wallet, and it sort of has 2 characteristics. One is that it lives in the cloud, right? And the reason it lives in the cloud is because it needs to be accessed by more than one person. So even a farm might have 20 employees and is an enterprise, and there might be multiple people that need to access the credentials in that wallet. So that's why you need an enterprise wallet. And you need to be able to, for example, allow different people to get access to it and even have different privileges in that wallet. And as I said, the difference here too is that the credentials aren't really about a person, they're about an enterprise. They're about that farm, which is an enterprise. It's not about the farmer or someone else that works there. These are enterprise credentials. So in this case here, you might have the farmer's greenhouse gas emission certificate, or it might be organic status of the farm. So the farm may be wanting to get organic status, so they need to get a credential that says they've been organically certified, and they can present that credential. But again, they're enterprise credentials, they're not personal credentials. So it's not appropriate to live on one of the farm employees' wallets on their mobile. So I said here, the enterprise wallet may be accessible more than one authorised employee, requiring a delegated authorisation model, right? So that you can set it up and say these 5 people can get it, but this person can look at these types of credentials and this one can do these types of credentials. So it's a bit more sophisticated. Now let's talk about governance. All right. So there was something that I kind of neglected in the trust over IP stack. I've been talking about this side, which is the ledger, DIDCOM connections, areas, protocols, etc. But in Trust over IP, they also have another side to it, which is called the governance stack, right? And for each of these layers, they have kind of governance definitions. What we're interested in this project is governance at this level, at the credential level. They weren't really interested in governance at this level and this level. It was basically around the credentials, is to say they could put some rules around the credentials, and I'll talk about what those are. So in this agricultural, this ecosystem, there is a centralised authority, right, which kind of makes kind of interesting given it's a decentralised system, but there is a centralised authority that sets rules for the network. And then participants, whether you're a farmer or one of those other entities, agree to follow the rules of the network. And the governance rules, I said, were related to verifiable credentials. They want to be able to set up rules. So they said, I want to be able to set up a list of who are the trusted issuers in the network, what credentials are those trusted issuers allowed to issue, who are the trusted verifiers in the network, and what credentials they are allowed to verify. Now, it didn't mean, for example, in the wallet that you couldn't accept a credential from a non-trusted. It would just mark it in the wallet as this was a credential that came out of this ecosystem versus one that was in the ecosystem. And then then you say, okay, there's two main standards around kind of credentials at this point. So if you look at trust over IP again, there's a standard around trust registry. And I wrote here, when an event occurs, for example, wallet receives a credential offer, the wallet makes a call to a central server. So think of this as a centralized approach to governance, where the governance body runs a server and the different entities actually communicate the server when they're going to perform an action to see whether it's trusted or non-trusted. That's what they call the trust registry approach. There's also a sort of competing standard called in DIF, called the trust establishment. In this case, it's a bit different. In this case, the governance body creates a JSON file that has the rules, and that JSON file is distributed out to the network. So when a wallet, for example, wants to see if this is a trusted issuer, they just consult the JSON file and then display it to the user whether this is trusted or untrusted. Right, so they're kind of the two different approaches. For this project, we picked the DIF trust establishment method only because we're a little bit more uncomfortable with that centralized approach, because the problem with a centralized approach is if you're continually having all of the wallets and their issuers and verifiers talking about the central body, you've really got a pretty good track of what's happening in the network. In fact, you've sort of got a kind of footprint of everything that's happening in the network, which is good and bad. So we just said, no, let's just distribute the rules around and let those be enforced locally on the issuers, verifiers, and in the wallets. So what's the project status? Okay, we completed 2 pilots in 2023, enrolled over 300 farms as part of these pilots. And if you think about that, it's a pretty interesting issue. So they'd go to a region and they'd say, come to this event, we're going to show you how to enroll in the system. So they'd turn up and they would say, see those QR codes, download your wallet. They downloaded the wallet. Now we're going to show you what credentials mean, how they can be issued, how you can present them, and all of that. And when that started, it was terrible, right? The farmers just didn't get it. But over time, it got more well-tuned until by the end, there was a set of slides and information that when the farmers came in, they could really understand what was going on. So that was how the farms were enrolled. There was 5 combined issuers and verifiers. In this case, it was interesting. Every issuer also tended to be a verifier as well. It wasn't like I just issued something. Mostly everybody verified something before they issued something. And a good example is the Farmers Federation really produced the authentication credential. So before you communicated with one of the other parties, you'd present that, they'd verify it, then they would issue you a credential. And then you might communicate with another one, present your authentication credential, get back the next credential, and you might have to get those 2 and present it to the bank. So these are just ones. And again, this was just done to sort of prove the concept. So there's fertiliser use, farm boundary, greenhouse gases, and carbon credentials, which showed. And it's a kind of a living environment for that. Now we're at the stage of moving to production. And again, there has to be a consortium of vendors. The target is 40,000 plus farms and 40 plus issues and verifiers. So it's quite a big network, and it's going to take, I would say, another year or 2 to get all this done. So what are the conclusions from this project? I think here, I learned a huge amount from doing this project, because when you're faced with practical reality on the ground with people and other vendors, and you're having to work with them, you learn a lot. I think the DI Verifiable Credentials system did provide an excellent foundation for this verifiable data exchange, because in the end, what they were trying to do is they needed to get verifiable data from point A to point B, right? And so that when point B got the data, they knew that it was verifiable. And the verifiable credential system does allow you to do that. The other thing is we could use multiple vendors on the project because of the standardization, because things like credentials, connection and exchange protocols, verifiable data registry, everything there is standardized. it was interesting. We kind of plugged and played together, and the things worked pretty well. Participants in a network can be issuers, verifiers, or holders, and they can be often more than one of those. And they exchange data using these DI standards. I said, yeah, it was possible to build a consortium of different software vendors on the project because it's all standards-based. If it wasn't all standards-based, we'd never be able to do this. And I guess the important thing is, as I said, I gave you, this was the first choices that were made to go through these pilots, but these choices are going to change. So, for example, I can see us moving pretty quickly to W3C credentials rather than using a non-creds. We'll move from Aries protocols 1.0 to 2.0. We're providing wallet options for SDK, mobile wallets, and enterprise wallets. So just in this one project, there will be 3 different wallet instantiations in there kind of as part of the project. And that's it. So that's my overview of my project. So I guess I can open it up for questions. Have you got a microphone now?
So wait for us to come to you with the mic because we want to make sure your question gets recorded. Saw you first.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting topic. And as you were going through it, my mind was thinking about, I work for a retail organization, so we have supply chain, we have business partners, and a lot of times we can't count on them to be, I guess, even have a smartphone, for example. You mentioned dealing, you onboarded 300 farmers as a proof of concept or pilot. Were there any that wanted to opt out, or is there anything that like, what if they didn't have a smartphone, or is that even a thing?
No, we didn't have that problem. The only problem we had is maybe some older phones, very old phones. But what we learned on that project is farmers all have mobile phones because when they're on the tractor, they want to be able to communicate. So that wasn't a problem at all, and they're all fairly sophisticated on the wallets. When we go more towards the enterprise wallet, that will be different challenges, right? Because it's about the bigger farming enterprises being able to set up, but then they'll probably have more capability in that there. So I would say no, there wasn't challenges in that. I mean, at the end of the day, though, the challenge was more explaining the concepts. What does it mean that you're going to have a wallet and I'm going to receive a credential and I'm going to present a credential, and more the fundamentals like that. The use of the technology wasn't a problem. Like they would say, by the time it was sort of wired in, I said, the group that went out to the farmers got better and better and better, and they said by the end they could bring 30 farmers into a room and within an hour they've all installed wallets, issued and verified credentials, and done all the things they need to do.
And is essentially scanning that QR code and then installing the wallet, was that all that was expected of them, or did they have to make a decision on the verifier and the issuers?
Well, we had an environment set up for them, so they went through, in fact, a whole sequence of about 10 steps where they went through and got a credential, presented it another one, got another credential, presented. We actually took them through a real-life kind of workflow of about 10 steps.
Thank you.
Were any of the farms like raising animals, like maybe like where they're instead of like large areas of crops or driving tractors around, maybe more focused to like farm buildings with chickens or pigs or?
The farms had everything. Like some of them were beef farmers, some of them were sheep, some were pigs, some grew crops. Like, is that the question? What types of farms they were? All different types. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
But they all, and it didn't matter what you were. Like, you've got all these new reporting requirements. So, for example, the local councils, they want to know exactly what fertiliser you're using, how much. So they needed to get credentials presented from the fertiliser company, so they could present an end of year report that said this farm used the following fertilisers. So it's
thank you.
No problem with that.
Oh, I got a question for you. So, what was kind of the elevator pitch then to the farmers about why they need to do the wallet thing?
I think they understood it very well, because all this is really doing is replacing often a paper-based system. So they're already emailing around PDF documents and storing files and doing all sorts of things, and it's pretty clumsy. Like they all do a lot of this already to some extent, and that's why I said the biggest problem for farmers now is not being able to get onto the tractor because you're in the office doing all this reporting and compliance and all these things. So the sales really to them is, let's have a system that's a lot more efficient and easy to use. Oh, over here, yep.
I want to play off that previous question, actually. But before that question was asked, what I was going to ask you is, can you talk a little bit more about whether the issuers and the verifiers were often the same parties, like you had alluded to in your demo and their proof of concept? But now I'm coming to understand that this may be sort of a gateway into getting people to replace PDFs, right? That they're already emailing about. They're emailing about these unsigned documents, right? And what you've done is upgraded them to exchanging signed credentials, even if the issuer and the verifier is maybe even the same party. At least the claims are signed, right? And so they remain valid and they participate in a governance life cycle. But that being said, can you talk a little bit more about the issuers and verifiers and whether you see there being a movement towards the verifiers expanding beyond the initial set of parties?
Oh, yeah. So I guess there's one. I don't know. Seems like I drop out. There's one side of the question is the technology here is kind of pretty independent for anyone who's exchanging data, right? And that's why I think I can't remember what the title was, but it was all about verifiable data. At the end of the day, this was about getting data that was verifiable, meaning it's signed, there's a set of claims. So as I said, anything in a PDF document can be put into a credential and signed by an issuer, and the verifier knows who the issuer is. They know it hasn't been changed, all the good cryptographic properties. And so any industry that's exchanging PDF documents, is ripe for this type of technology, because if you think about what you can do, I mean, fraud is just something you can do. If I want to be organically certified, I create a PDF document, has the logo of the certifier, and it just says I'm organically certified. Right? How does the verifier or the wholesaler know that? Well, when it's a credential, they really know it. When it's not a credential, they don't know it. All they know is they've received on email a PDF document saying that they're certified. So I think any industry where you want to verify data that's being transferred within an organisation or to partners or whatever is ripe for this technology.
One over here. Yeah, I want to ask you about the current scope or geographical reach, both for the pilot and the 40,000 plus farmers and 40 organizations you mentioned. It's all US based?
This was, I don't know if anyone could see on the slide there. There's one time where I gave it away where it was. This is actually in New Zealand. So in New Zealand, there's 40,000 plus farmers. In Australia, there's something over 60,000. In the US, I have no idea how many there'd be. I'm sure it's in the hundreds of thousands. Canada would be the same. Yeah.
You mentioned it's all New Zealand based.
Yeah, that's New Zealand based, yeah.
Hi, Paul. Great question, or great presentation, by the way. So if I'm getting this right, does this provide a kind of verified chain of custody format? Like if the fertilizer company is issuing a VC with that like PDF document to a farm that says you've acquired X tons of fertilizer, and then the farmer goes, okay, I've got that as something I can pass on to my local council, or can pass on some metric that says I've applied half of that, or whatever. But at least is that part of the benefit that they're trying to achieve there?
Well, I guess the benefit
is that really what part of this is?
Yeah, because it's exactly as you said. So that's just one example where a fertilizer company will issue you, before the Verifiable Credentials would just issue a PDF or an email that says this is what it is. You would then have to provide that to the local council so they know in this region how much fertilizer is being used, how much is ending up in the waterways and all that. So in this case, it's the fertilizer company issues a verifiable credential with that information to the farmer, and then the farmer is in a position to present that to whoever they need to present it to. Could be the local council, it might be to the bank, it might be to federal government. They might have to present it in multiple places. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's the data that was produced at the fertiliser company gets all the way to the local council intact. Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? How did you incent the fertilizer companies to come on board? Like, what was their incentive? They could say, just printing PDFs. What do I care about what they do with them after that?
In some ways, though, you're quite right. So you not only have to sell this to the farms, but all those other organisations also need to be sold, right? I would say the advantage in this particular example is that the local government and the federal government are pushing digital technology like this, and so there is a kind of an incentive to make this system move, because the farmers are going to have to provide the appropriate data to the federal government and to the local government. So those fertiliser companies are sort of need. Is there advantage to them? Maybe there is, but at the end of the day, they need to provide things that the farmers can use for compliance reasons, regulatory reasons. So there's a lot of compliance regulation that's driving a lot of this in this particular project.
Question here. Hey Paul, thanks for your presentation. My question is related to the data. So much of the data that you talked about is dynamic in nature. Some of it's static, perhaps like the geospatial information, but you talk about fertilizer usage and so on. So if I'm going to get a report on that that's digitally signed by the issuer, i.e. the fertilizer company, that's kind of real-time data, or at the time of reporting I need to
It is a report.
Right? So
Yep.
for real-time data, one might argue that a federation model might have been, a better way to do that. I understand it's centralised, but you can, deliver real-time claims rather than claims that have to be downloaded from the issuer at the time you want that report generated and then presented separately. So, what I guess workflows have had to be put in place with respect to educating farmers on, when they need to obtain their verifiable document, more so than a credential, I guess I want to call it, if it's a report that's digitally signed, such that the data in it is current, because some of that data is going to date very quickly if the claims that are being presented are dynamic information.
Yeah, and I mean the information is dynamic in that each month the fertiliser report might be different. There wasn't. I guess all I could say to that is there wasn't really, at least at this stage, no sort of real-time reporting requirements. What the reporting requirements were is, at the end of the quarter, you need to get the report that you present to the council or something like that. It was all, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months data, and then you'd send that report in, and then obviously you're buying into the next year, and then when you have to report again, you get the new report, and then you present that. So I'd say there's no, at least in this particular, I'm trying to think if there could be, but there hasn't been any more real-time requirements, if that makes sense. Like, you don't have to continually, week by week, give it. It's usually just, what you're doing is replacing something that was a PDF report and replacing it with a credential that might report for the last 12 months. Yeah, so maybe it's not the real time, yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Great presentation. I have a question more around technology. Well, we know in this space it's still nascent, and there's like a lot of standards and new version of protocol, exchange, and so on. When you're saying, okay, we're using this now, maybe we're going to change and everything, you're in a pilot mode right now. Do you expect to change what you're going to do for production? So right now you're all on the Hyperledger stack. Do you expect to make changes? In the sense, what I'm a bit afraid of is like the farmers and everything, they don't want to know what you're using inside, right? That's
the farmers never know. The farmers never know. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I did make the point that it's going to be dynamic from the credential format, exchange protocol format, even maybe verifiable data registry. I'll give you an example. So one thing that happened late in the project is that, I said this was New Zealand. The New Zealand government put a law to say credentials must be W3C credential format, following data model 1.1, right? So pretty much we knew,
okay, we need to be able to support that. Now that's, and you say for a vendor like us
Who's building software? Is that a problem?
yeah, it's a big
Big problem because
we've got to support multiple credential types, multiple exchange protocols, multiple verifiable data registries. So it is a problem for us, and I guess it's a problem for everyone in the industry that if you're going to be able to go and solve multiple problems in multiple industries, one set of technology in one industry may not be the right technology for another industry. So I guess that's just a challenge for us as a vendor. So can we support W3C credentials? Yes, we can, right? We have no problem doing that. So the changeover for us isn't a problem. Is it a changeover for the other vendors in the network? I guess time will tell, right, as we move along. So I think all projects are going to be like that, though, that what you happen to be using now, in a year or two, you'll migrate as the standards migrate, yeah, and move. Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's a big
challenge for software vendors. It's a big challenge.
So, could you explain just a little bit about the connection between the ID for the entity of the farm and the ID for the individual that represents that farm, and how do you connect those? So that's number one. Number two, have you thought of, or have you guys evolved into the ability to start tracking effect of fertilizers for a certain region? So let's say that it produces wheat or corn or products of that. Do you track that based on this ID? If there's an issue of some controversial, or like ailments or something.
Yeah, okay, so I'll answer the first question. So the first thing we learned is that
that all of the credentials are related to the farm. It's nothing related to any individuals, right? There's no individuals. That's why I said they're really enterprise credentials, not personal credentials. Where the individual comes in is using an enterprise wallet. Within the enterprise, you need to be able to control who can access the wallet, who can accept, who can present credentials and things like that. So within our enterprise wallet, there is this authorization policy that allows individuals to come in and be able to access the credentials, but the credentials themselves never have any personal information or any identifiers of individuals. It's all about the farm. So you saw where it said Farmers Federation. So the first step really for any farm was to go to the federated farmers and get the first credential which says this is Farm A, and I can prove that I'm Farm A because I've got the Farm A's credential. So they proved that, and that's why every one of the issuers became a verifier, because they wanted to be able to verify that credential that identified the farm before they could release any of the, issue a credential out to that farm. Yep. Time for one last question.
Hi, great presentation, thank you. I had a question about the identity lifecycle, but you just talked about it. There are no individuals directly involved in the credentials. They only log into the enterprise cloud wallet.
Yeah.
Do you have other types of, is there only one instance, only one product behind the enterprise cloud wallet, or multiple providers could provide it, and any participant, any company, any farmer or any issuer could choose its own flavor of wallet?
Yeah. So the question's about the wallets, right? And as I said, the thing that we learned is across those ecosystems of 40,000 farmers, there was 3 different wallet instances they wanted. One is my farm, like one of those enterprises, my farmers already have an app. I want the wallet added to my app, right? So that's the SDK, right? Then you had personal wallets. I'm a small farm, a personal wallet, living on my mobile is just fine. That's the personal wallet case, even though they're enterprise credentials, storing them on a personal wallet. And then you've got the enterprise case, which is what we built an enterprise wallet to allow the cloud-based storage, and you can access it either from a mobile or from a web app into that enterprise wallet.
Paul, thank you very much for that outstanding masterclass.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. Please go into the app and take a minute to fill out the session surveys. It really helps us with getting good content for you for next year.